Hello, wonderful people. So nice to have you here on the live stream today on this, well, it's a sunny day out here in California. I am Justin Ribeiro, so good to see you out there, all you wonderful people. And welcome to This.Labs presentation of Web Performance, the basics. So, for those of you who don't know me, I am Justin Ribeiro. I'm the EVP over here at This.Labs on web platform engineering, which means that I get to work on the platform and help our clients with their sort of platform needs and all the things that we sort of do to make the web better across all kinds of stuff. You can find me on Twitter, where I sometimes post random performance-based random things. And if you need to get a hold of me, you can always find me there. And just in case you didn't know, are you finding it difficult to keep up with the constantly evolving technologies? You know, is it a struggle? I know it is a struggle for lots of folks out there. Do you want to bring your team up to speed on one of the latest technologies? Maybe that's React, maybe that's web performance. That's why you're here today, right? Well, hey, This.Labs, we offer personalized training services to suit your organizational needs, ensuring you and your company stay on the leading edge. So contact us today at hi@this.co to set up your complimentary needs assessment. And in case it wasn't clear, This.Labs is sponsoring this. So we do lots of things on this series of things. Today I'm talking about web performance. Other talks today have been about Angular and React and all kinds of other cool web platform technologies and all the things that sort of make your organizations tick. So we have lots of we have lots of partners out there that we help with their modern digital transformation. We specialize in mentorship. Folks like myself go out and help consult and train, and we can help staff augment your enterprise. So do find out more at this.labs.com or send us an email at hi@this.co. So with some of the formalities sorted out, let's talk about web performance, the basics. So for those out there who think about the notion of web performance can be all-encompassing. But at the end of the day, web performance is one major thing, and it's about real, actual people. So a lot of times we get bogged down initially in the notion that, oh my gosh, it's this huge sort of ginormous scope of a thing, and I've got a server over here, and I've got the web stuff over here, and I've got my framework, and I have all these things. But at the end of the day, it's about people. And really, it's about retaining, converting, engaging with those people on the various devices and platforms that they use. And a lot of times, it can be hard as a developer inside of an organization to go forward with performance and say, hey, you know what, our web stuff is just not performing as well as it should. You know, how does your manager or how does your tech lead, sort of look at that, and how are they going to approach that with things as you sort of go through the steps of like, hey, the main thread looks a little rough here. Like maybe we should fix that. But really, the research has shown that retaining those users comes with speed. Like it's very difficult to retain people as your site and your applications slow down. So you want to make sure that performance is front of mind. And a lot of times, we talk about the technology side of it, but at the end of the day, it's about users using things on real devices, on real world networks, dealing with all kinds of the sort of things that sometimes as developers we forget, because we have workstations, we have the very, very, ideally fancy stuff that sort of makes our lives as developers easier, but is not necessarily representative of actual people. And we don't want to prevent people from, converting that endpoint when they're on that shopping cart. We don't want to lose them through engagement if our site takes 10 seconds to load on a mobile network when you're out on 3G, in a tunnel somewhere. We're not getting that engagement we want, right? So we're always trying to think about people. Yeah, but here's the thing. I have a secret. See, you all are real people too. Developers out there, engineers, and we love you. Like a lot of times the performance conversation that you see online is very hostile, and it's not very conducive to sort of talking about the nature of the way someone overcomes performance challenges as they go through. And as developers being real people too, that means that, you know, you have particular needs and whatnot that I don't know that web performance has sort of helped you get through. If you've ever tried to search for, you know, how do I make something more performant? How do I sort of attack or approach something to solve an actual real user problem? And one of the reasons for that is that it's a very vast and overwhelming sort of situation that we have created on the web platform. There are dozens of acronyms that I'm sure someone has memorized, but admittedly, I have to look up every once in a while because there's a new one seemingly every day. Rails, FMP, Purple, oh my. And realistically, all those things are important, but it can be very overwhelming if you've never had to actually sort through a performance problem, right? You look at that and you say, well, I know that Rail means, what is it, response and animation, but my thing doesn't have animation, but I do have an idle time. What about my load characteristics? And the acronym may make, you may understand what it fundamentally means, but does that actually help you actually deliver on that thing as you sort of go down the rabbit hole that is web performance? And that can be overwhelming for a lot of developers. Similarly speaking, the platform is rapidly changing. For a very long time, the web platform seemed very stagnant as things got sorted out in spec world, and those things sort of trickled down into browsers. But the web has sort of really ramped up the last few years, where we've gotten not just a lot more web platform features as a whole that are lower level, that give our frameworks and our libraries and all the code that we write, a more solid foundation. They've also increased, is actually increased from the standpoint of our performance metrics. So things like cumulative layout shift and things of that nature as these new APIs come down, such as the layout stability API. With those rapid changes, you're going to find things that we used to talk about a couple of years ago that we no longer talk about today. So, TTI was something that time to interactive, which is still very important. But we also look at things like first input delay now. What's the difference between those two things? And again, it can be overwhelming that the platform has changed so much. We have new APIs, new underlying architectures on the web and in these browsers that it can be hard to keep track. So I feel for you on that. Similarly speaking, a lot of our tools can be either lacking or very obtuse. In the wild west of things, it wasn't necessarily very fun. The web had a lot of deficiencies initially that, from a performance standpoint, required a significant lift as a developer to sort of understand. In early days, we didn't have a lot of the marking tools that you would normally see now that would indicate, certain types of paints. We didn't have, the command line tools to even interact with the browser through things like the DevTools protocol. And these were dark days, realistically, for web performance as a whole, because you really had to get into the weeds to even try to get anything useful out to be able to sort that out. And realistically, all these things are important because web perf hasn't just been that easy, right? We've all sort of experienced that dulge. And again, like I have a lot of empathy for developers who go, I just don't know where to get started. And don't worry, it's going to be okay. So where does one start? Do you start with the acronyms? Do you go through all the marks that are available within the performance API and the browser? Like where do you start? And I like to start by laying the foundation of things before you get into the deep weeds of the finer points of web performance. Number one, performance is relative. So a lot of times we've all experienced this as developers, particularly when it comes to defects or bugs. The very notion of, hey, it works on my machine. Now, I don't know a developer who hasn't actually heard those words. I pretty much hear it, every other day at the very least. But the notion is very similar in that performance is relative between devices, between connection types, between people. So something that is very fast on user X's device may not be very fast on user Y's device. And yet they may be the exact same device. Ooh, mysteries. So realistically, the one thing that you don't want to fall into the trap of when you start to talk about performance is you don't want to talk about the notion of absolute sort of performance. It's really a range of conditions that are going to be applied across the things that are useful for your end users. So if I'm here in the States and everyone's on an iPhone, maybe iOS Safari is a very targeted thing that I'm going to trace and find really specific performance targets for. If I'm overseas, in particular, emerging markets, you might have, 3G connectivity problems where the latency is very high. And yet that person's iPhone is the same as that person in the United States iPhone. So you end up with these discrepancies that you do have to account for. And you always want to make sure that you're not just testing against one thing, but against a multitude of things. Number two, performance is also a lot about perception. So a trap that people fall into is that they fall back on things that were sort of long-term knowns within the web world. The one that I see a lot is the notion of page load time. So the DOM content loaded event timer is a common thing that used to get picked up by pretty much every piece of telemetry or instrumentation known to mankind. And realistically, it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to a user, right? We know that if I have two devices and they both load at 10 seconds, is that indicative of the perception of that load experience? Is one faster than the other? The load timer would tell you no, because it doesn't tell you anything about the notion of what painted onto that screen, what kind of content was delivered in that thing, when the actual skeleton or some other structure painted first, or what the progression of that thing was in terms of were they able to even interact with that page. So a lot of times when we look at performance, people get hung up on really, really specific numbers, right? You don't want to get stuck on really a particular number per se. You want to look at the overall nature of how your application is performing as a whole and what the perception of that user is. If you've got a blank white screen for 10 seconds and then you get a pop at 10, it's not the same thing as a progressively structured paint over the course of 10 seconds where things that are not in your main view are basically not painted or not important enough to load at the beginning. So there's a lot of these things where perception plays key points in this. And a lot of the research says, you want animations of roughly, you want a 300 millisecond transitional animation because that is about the human perceptive time of like, oh, this looks smooth. I want 60 FPS. All these little things that sort of give you the perception of performance across the board. And then the third one is the notion that performance oftentimes is a lot about reduction. So the one thing that we should always roughly be thinking about is the notion of less things. We should ship less JavaScript. We should ship less network resources in general. We should not be burning up the main thread in somebody's browser, particularly on mobile, which is can be really atrocious for battery life, amongst other things, particularly where byte charges are expensive. And again, you want less render time. You want to be faster. So a lot of the things that we start to back away from and look at comes down to the notion of, well, I'm shipping a lot of things so that my application does X. How much delight is that generally going to bring my user if I ship all this right up front? Like, can I lazy load some of it later on? And again, previously speaking, we did not have a great deal of tooling that would allow us to do many of these things. Like you had to roll your own, you had to come up with your own substructures and systems to say, I need to ship this less. We're going to come up with something else. But the reality is that the tools have started to take away the guesswork, allowing us to measure a lot more quickly at various stages of our development. That gives us a better sort of inclination to web performance. So we get a significantly better set of tools, which not only don't have to be installed on your local machine, they just come straight in your browser now. So we've looked at some slides. I've rambled about some really specific foundation things. But let's excuse me. Let's take a moment and let's look at some tools, because at the end of the day, it might be helpful to become familiarized with some tools. And to look at some tools, it's, let's not do it in isolation. Let's have some fun. I mean, it's a Wednesday. If Wednesday doesn't say fun, I don't know what does. Performance on a Wednesday. So let's see if I can find my mouse cursor. We're going to look at a website. Now, fundamentally, I could go and look at pretty much, any site on the web, and we could trace it and, look at some things and whatnot. But that wouldn't be, necessarily kind. We're going to look at my personal site, because at the end of the day, it's easy enough to trace. We can go through a set of tools, and fundamentally, I don't have to call anybody out on a live stream. That's not what this is for. Empathy. Better web performance. We can all do it. So that's very small. If you push the right button. There we go. All right. So here we are in DevTools. So this is Chrome stable at the moment. If you want to always see the latest set of tooling that's sort of in DevTools, you can always go into Beta or Canary. Or if you want to get crazy, you can always build Chromium. I don't know if anybody out there wants to build Chromium, but we could have a session on that too. So we're going to talk about DevTools to start, because DevTools at the end of the day is where most people fundamentally understand where to go when they're trying to debug things. So a lot of folks have come into DevTools. They've used it to verify their CSS, look for particular bugs, something that might pop up in the console. DevTools has a lot of very specific performance tooling in it these days. Some of it's been reshuffled over the years, but when in doubt, always pop up DevTools and start your journey there. And one place that I always generally start is the Performance tab. The Performance tab straight away will give you the baseline of what you want to run. So we can fire it up and profile and see exactly what our site is doing as it's doing things. So in this case, you can see that my tiny progressive web app of a website doesn't do a whole bunch. Fundamentally, we can zoom in, and I realize that I've zoomed in quite a lot. This is somewhat hard to see. You can see what your main thread is doing. You can see all this great information, and there's a whole bunch of data points within here that we're not going to go over today, but that gives us sort of the baseline for future learning as we start to look at the tools. Performance allows you to basically see all the things that are happening in your main thread. It'll let you look at your compositor, which will get your frames to the screen. It'll look at see your interactions. You can look and see if you have workers, all those sorts of things. These are all the things that sort of make our websites tick, right? We write code, we deliver it to the browser. This gives us a performance baseline of how that thing is rendering out. Now, when you look at it, the key thing that I see a lot of people do straight away that sort of gives them a lot of heartache when it comes to dealing with performance is they start with the sort of top end of things. And again, the top end of stuff in this regard is that you're starting with a network condition that you're just online. You haven't lowered your overall network connection. There's no CPU throttling on this, so it's running wide open on as much thread as I've got. And in this case, it's a workstation-y type of laptop with many threads and many CPU gigahertz that will make our life nicer for a development standpoint, but doesn't necessarily give you a baseline for a lot of users who are coming off of mobile devices. So a lot of this we can get down into the nature of, how exactly does my thing load on 3G? How does it load if I slow everything down? Will my performance timeline look the same? And fundamentally, it probably won't, right? We know that our performance in this case, you can see, kind of stretches out. We know that the network and the case of resources start to stretch out. Yikes, cannot see that. We can come over here and we can see the network resources that come on. Because again, these things all sort of dovetail. We have to deliver resources to the end browser, which we can look at to see what exactly gets loaded when. In this case, you can see some of this is coming from the service worker. In this case, we can isolate We can view our tasks to see exactly how long we've got in terms of things that are running on that thing. So this is kind of a long task right here, 86, right? So in the new sort of world of things, right, we want tasks that are generally less than 50 milliseconds. We can see we've evaluated a module. We can pull this up and look more down into our call trees of stuff. And again, DevTools is where, if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of things, when it comes to performance, the performance tab is your friend, but can be rather confusing for people who are just getting started out as to what all these things mean. In this case, orange is our script time. Purple and green are things that are rendering and painting and compositing. Blue being document parsing time. So all these things sort of combine to give you a lot of information, but it can be hard to parse out. So there are other tools in here, though, that we can help to use that sort of help highlight certain things that our page is doing without actually having to go through here and go, man, I don't know exactly what's going on in here, but it looks important, right? Oh, I gotta sort this out. So if we come over here to our Audits tab, which will soon be renamed to Lighthouse in the next version of Chrome, you can run a pure audit. So I've run an audit on here previously today, here at 12:18, just to get a baseline. So in this case, Lighthouse gives us the ability to basically use all the fancy stuff that's in the Performance tab and the Network tab and combine it into a way that gives us a really clear picture of just exactly what all that stuff means. So a lot of people say, well, where do you start? And I usually start from Lighthouse these days. It can be a lot simpler to pull out quick meaning for a particular page to see exactly how a web app is performing. So in this case, Lighthouse will surface a few things. And again, you can see the definition straight away by clicking the little link up here, or the little button rather. And you can see that, our first contentful paint is roughly around 2.5, or, a little less than 2.25 seconds. Speed index of a similar thing in terms of visual popularization of that page, structure and things. First CPU idle, which is very important, sort of tells you the story of how your CPU operates. Max potential input delay, basically how long things are kind of janked up in terms of that interactive state. And some of this, again, the nice thing about Lighthouse is that you're like, well, these number looks good. They're green. That seems good. But the nitty gritty is sort of down here in opportunities and whatnot. So even with, the site that's out there now, like it's like, oh, hey, you have a unminified bundle chunk for some reason. Hey, I did not know that. Instantly know that. Don't have to go through the network tool. I could reasonably go through the network tool, look through it, and go, I wonder why that is. And in this case, it's likely because I got a whole bunch of licensed things in here or whatnot, or that could be the service worker one. So you go back through the audit side of life, and you can continue to go down here and see exactly what full set of past audits you have, full things that are actually causing users grief. Because again, this is stuff that you want to surface as things that are affecting users, not necessarily sort of the mundane thing where we talk about, hey, can I make a loop that's 2 milliseconds be 1 millisecond? That's not the kind of performance we're looking for. We're looking for performance that affects users at the end of the day. And the nice thing about Lighthouse is that you can pull those audits straight away and go, well, I know how those things are working. Same thing with its warning about, hey, this preload was not used in these cases. So these are areas for improvement. Terrible developer who wrote this blog. Terrible. It's just a hack of a hack. And then again, you can see in other important things that you want to take into account, right? So we talk about the notion of less stuff. And again, like JavaScript execution time is a big problem on the web today. We ship a lot of JavaScript. We make JavaScript do things that possibly shouldn't be needed to do. And Lighthouse will surface that straight away for us. So normally here we see about 0.4 seconds of execution time with a total CPU time with script evaluation and everything else. Of the higher side of things, which is okay for a 3G emulated device because Lighthouse is going to push you into the mobile realm at all times. And again, like these numbers right here, right? I'm not so much worried about. I want them to be smaller numbers. Same thing with minimizing thread work, right? I want to make sure that of all the things that are happening, scripting and compiling, rendering, style and layout, all that stuff that we can surface here, we can surface very, very much quicker within the scope of Lighthouse very, very quickly for end users, for end developers. So we can go, hey, you know what? Our parse time for HTML is really long. Why is that? Oh, we're server rendering a whole bunch of DOM nodes on there, and our DOM node count is really, really high. Okay, well, we should, not do that. Let us reduce. So we're always looking for these sort of principles within this set of data. And again, like we can see the excessive DOM size. Again, it's avoid enormous payloads. It wants to look for payloads and third-party resourcing within that set. Again, you don't have to sit there and go, man, I got to spend all day going through my network log to figure out what exactly, which bad actor of a third-party resource I have. You do not. You can use Lighthouse right now, today, in your browser as you're watching me. You can literally run this and run an audit on the screen you're looking at. And it'll give you similar policy or similar updates and information. And Lighthouse goes a lot deeper than just this. So you're like, well, Justin, that's great and all fine and dandy, but I don't want to have to open DevTools, run an audit every time I'm doing development work. Indeed, you do not have to. So if we pop open a console, so if we pop open a console of things, Lighthouse is available as a command line tool as well. So you can run Lighthouse and say, well, I want to run it right now and just find out exactly how I'm running it. And in my case, I'm going to run it in a Docker container just because I wrote that Docker container and I love Docker containers. So we can run the same thing. It'll ask us for, hey, do you want to send some telemetry? It'll fire some things up. And then you can run it on your command line and run all the same audits against whatever domain or local test server you have that ideally looks kind of like your real site. So you get a good baseline of performance characteristics on there. And you can run that thing and it'll run that log for us. And in this case, we can this one. And we're going to stop that, come over here, run this. And we can see another style of the report. And again, you can see the numbers are roughly similar. Again, relative, right? Where we were running that through a Docker container, which had its own headless version of Chrome. And fundamentally, you get a very similar style report. In this connect links are still a problem. I should probably take a look at that. Again, hack developer, that Justin guy. So again, you can see a whole bunch of additional audits too. We have accessibility in there. We have best practices. These are things that you would normally, again, have to scrub through your scope of code that you have sort of in the browser or through whatever development tooling you're using to see all these various things. So, if we're using H2 for resources, right? So that we can end up with basically connection multiplexing, which is a huge performance improvement. Are we using passive scroll handlers? All the sort of things that, we want to do. And in this case, it'll detect your JavaScript libraries to tell you if you've got vulnerabilities or other sub issues. So if you're using a framework and you're going, hey, what version, is this version of Angular I'm using potentially, XYZ? Great. It'll detect that and tell you things about it. Same thing with Vue or React or any of those. SEO, it'll tell you various things about this. Again, very simple set of procedure stuff. Not to be overlooked by any means, especially, again, you're talking to end users, you want to be found in search. These are all things that you can surface very quickly in any manner of tooling. And then, of course, it'll tell you if you have a progressive web app. So if you're looking to say, well, can I deliver this as a progressive web application? And you're wondering if you've got all your sort of boxes ticked off to make sure that it's an installable version of it, Lighthouse will help you with that too. And again, normally you could do the same thing by looking through the application tab to verify various bits and pieces of this. So In this case, you go verify your manifest, make sure your thumbnails and all your start presentation is clear, making sure your start URL is there. You can look at to see verify your service worker to make sure your service worker is okay. Again, all these things available in the various panels within DevTools, but easily accessible in a variety of ways through things like Lighthouse. This isn't to say that you shouldn't use these tools, and we're going to talk more about these tools in further sessions as we go along, about just how to get into the nitty-gritty to find really specific performance things that are sort of holding back your site. Because a lot of times, while Lighthouse will give you a certain amount of information, you're going to have to get into the actual code portion of it to actually make changes and fixes within your code. And a lot of those acronyms we talked about, things like Rail or Purple, where we want to make sure that we are really cognizant of the way our network resources load, the way that we split our chunks and bundles, so that we're not loading something that's not immediately useful to an end user. All this stuff we can sort of look at and sort of eyeball through things like DevTools. This includes things like the coverage report, which will help show us just how much of our code we're actually using on any given page. So in this case, you can see that my two analytics libraries, Firebase Performance and Google Analytics, a lot of unused bytes there. The interesting thing about it being is that if we actually look at our timeline and go, well, we shouldn't be shipping all those bytes. If we actually look at our timeline, we actually can see that we're actually shipping them really late. So it actually doesn't load in the front piece that blocks our performance on the front. So we load the annex late so that we get a really nice fast first paint. So it's little things like that where the application of certain concepts you can see in the trace, and they all kind of connect together, right? I look at my coverage and go, well, I'm not using as much of these, but I don't control those libraries, so I still need them so I can get some analytics back. Okay, well, I'm going to load them late because I don't want them to block my paint timings, and I don't want them to prevent my user from reading my content or doing whatever else they want to do with my site or application. Same thing with this. Like you may have the case of, you're going to see coverage change based on how many routes you take. So again, if you're being predictive about certain things, like that may be specific to your case. So this is another one of those things that people get stuck on when we talk about web performance and we start looking at these tools and they say, you're doing it wrong because of XYZ is the way we do it. And again, the way I'm doing things right here against one site, in a relative case is not necessarily the way you would do everything all the time. It is relative to your use case. It is relative to your users and what you're trying to deliver. So you don't want to get far away. You don't want to get too far away from the notion of what's right for your end users, right? That's the one thing with web performance that I think people, again, if you forget about users, then the web is your playground of things and you'll ship all kinds of crazy stuff. And again, users may not use it. If you focus on users and you look at exactly what they're trying to get done within the span of time for a given URL, that's what you want to look at. And that's what you want to optimize your web performance for. And for me, that's, in this case, I want to render this article as fast as it can go. So DevTools under the hood, lots of performance stuff. Lighthouse helps us sort of serve that out in DevTools. We can run it locally or on a server through the command line. But there's also lots of other cool things you can do with this tooling, right? Okay, well, you've given me 2 tools to talk about, Justin, but like I have, I've got automation, CI, and all kinds of things. Web performance has come to those places now. It's a much magical more land now. Really, it's magical. So you're saying, okay, well, great, Justin, you ran it on the command line, you've done this. Well, I can actually run it on top of pull request too. So here is said blog thing. So it's open source. If you want to go, ripping me apart later about Justin, your weird blog thing is weird. In this case, here's a random pull request from about 5 days ago to add a feature for images. Code change is irrelevant for our conversation, but where I actually want to look at is this little GitHub action right here. So we know that Lighthouse runs in DevTools. We know that we can run it in a Docker container as well against a headless version of Chrome that never popped an actual window to actually run anything. Well, I can actually just write it into a GitHub action to test every pull request as well that comes through. And in this case, you can see that, oh no, the performance was terrible on that deploy. It should have never been merged. But you can see the actual timings from it. And again, it's relative to what was actually happening at the time. So this was spinning up a container, doing all the things that a GitHub action does. And the timings look a lot different than the one that I had locally. Which one is correct? You have to test them all. You have to find that baseline for these events against these sort of profiles. In this case, this was a really specific network profile with 3G fast using WebpageTest's profile. And you can see it was tested via this little Lighthouse action. In this case, I wrote this Lighthouse action. So this is yet another one of those tools. It'll tag things onto your PRs as needed. You can actually set budgets entirely. So one of the cool things about Lighthouse is that, hey, Justin, we've decided to set our own performance budgets. Great. You can performance budget to your blue in the face with all the things that you want to do. Lighthouse gives you those abilities. And again, you don't have to write a lot of custom tooling. You just have to define your own budgets within the subset of stuff. And if you're saying, well, Justin, I need more than that. I need diffing. I need all that. You will are in luck because we also have that in Lighthouse CI, which is from the Google Chrome team. So Lighthouse CI, you can run at a much larger scaled state that will say, well, you know what? I want to actually run these things straight away. I want to run them and compare them across a base set of artifacts. So you can actually see the amount of time, the amount of performance that you've gained between maybe the base reference as well as the remote branch you just pushed. So you can go commit to commit and say, wow, I've gained, my first contentful paint went down, but I've gained a little input delay on the top of that. You can see those things much clearer now with things like Lighthouse CI. And again, it's the same base tooling that we just played with over here. So all this stuff in here, which filtered into all these sort of reports right here, which fed into this one, which allows us to build things like this, all out of the base Lighthouse repo. So the tools now, to my point earlier in the presentation of things, they have significantly grown to the point where we have the ability to fire these things up significantly quicker. It is easier for developers like you out there to run these things. There's nothing preventing you from running them. You can run them pretty much anywhere. You can also run them on your device, which we'll talk about in another one of these presentations where Justin torches his pixel, because pixel time is fun when you torch things. So all this stuff leads to, well, that's great, Justin, but I don't want to run Lighthouse. I want, I need videos and other things of that nature and whatnot. Well, we have more tools for that too. And guess what? They still work with Lighthouse. So WebpageTest, you can run WebpageTest internal to your organizations as well if you want to set it up yourself, but you can also run it remotely against the various devices and things that are out there amongst the network of WebpageTest hosts. So in this case, you can see that I ran an earlier version of this at 12:54 today here on the West Coast against a Moto G4, which is an actual device, and in the 3G fast profile. And again, you can see not only the basic grading for WebPage performance test, but you can also see the additional timings. So things like your time to first byte, when that contentful paint hit, things like speed index, again, numbers not very far off. But again, slightly different. It's on an actual device. In this case, it'll surface things like last painted hero, which is looking for that large contentful paint, and it's looking for CPU idle time. And it'll do calculations against things like what does my site cost.com, which will tell you exactly how many bytes you used against that whole set of requests to deliver that thing. Similarly speaking, you can sit there and watch the film. You can see the film strip view and the watch video as well from that set to see exactly how you're rendering and exactly what that perception of your speed was. Because at the end of the day, all these tools sort of work back to those three things we talked about, which is they help you find what to reduce, they help you show what the perception of that speed is, and they help you across the board find the notion that these things are all relative. They are not necessarily the same. So in this case, the first view and the repeat run are roughly the same. In these two runs, there's actually a significant difference. So in this view right here, you see about 1.3 seconds. In the second view here, you see about half a second, a little more than half a second, primarily because the service work kicks in. And again, these are relative, right? These are relative runs. They are by themselves in this case of things. And you have to sort of collect those things and decide what to operate on, because these are lab-based style results. right? We're taking points in time, testing them relative to ourselves, and doing that sort of work. But on the other side, you're probably saying, hey, Justin, I'd really like to know what my users are experiencing. And there's a lot of tools out there today as well, things like the Chrome Experience Report, which will, if you have a very big origin with a lot of instrumentation that's going through things like Chromium, you can look those things up and sort of see and play with the numbers to figure out exactly how your site is performing. But if you're like me and do not have a ginormous origin of things, what you can do is you can use another free little tool, which you probably noticed was in my network log when I was talking about analytics, which was Firebase's performance for web performance stuff. So this is still in beta. It's in early days, but you can play with it now. In this case, it's showing the last 90 days of the site from January 1st this year, and basically showing me, my histogram of things. So all the action is really on the tails, in case you're always in the performance land of things. But you can get an idea of what actual users are experiencing when they actually load your site. You can go back through and sort of see what those medians are. You can go back through and see how different countries perform based on that sort of setup. You can see the effective connection type. So you can see that, a little less than 4.5% are 3G or lower on my site. You've got a lot of 4G, but does that mean that I leave these people behind? For me, no, because I'm always looking for speed. But again, this is a little known tool that is out there that is free to use today that you can play with. There's a lot of other robust tools out there as well that we'll talk about in other sort of sessions. But fundamentally, you can start collecting this data today. All this stuff is available through things like the Performance API, and you can use performance observers and all these sort of things that will help you determine just how critical the things you need to load are. Just what is that critical rendering path? Where exactly does my site need to go? And all of this, again, comes back to this very simple thing of there's a lot of information in DevTools that we just don't get to use a lot of because it looks, fairly complicated. But now the tools are beginning to surface those things for us that we can actually start to look at. So, switch. So we've talked about a lot of things very quickly in the last 43-ish minutes of things. I forgot to start my timer. I have no idea when we actually started, but I'm sure we're on target. So we've talked a lot about a lot of things. You can see that even my own personal site could use performance tuning. And that's the thing about performance, is that performance is not in a bottle. So what's fast yesterday, you still have to verify and track. You have to be able to make sure you continue to measure. And previously, that was a very difficult thing to do, which is why you all are out here listening to me talk about some of these tools today. So a lot of these tools you can use without a lot of roadblocks in most of your organizational environments today. Every environment is a little bit different. Every target is a little bit different. But as long as you know who your users you're trying to deliver to, you can get there as quickly as you really want to go, starting with these tools today. So that's the base of web performance. Yes, not a lot of acronyms today, Justin. No, we're not going to get into the acronyms weeds today. You can't start with the acronyms. Start with just taking a look at one thing within Lighthouse's audit. Do this today. Make that your morning ritual of a thing. Trace something. Could be your site, could be a thing you're working on. It could be just something random out there to see what exactly those performance characteristics look from the web. I trace stuff all the time because I'm very curious about the nature of the way people build things. The curiosity in your web performance journey will help you immensely. So that's something you can do. It takes no time at all. We can run one little thing right this very moment. Boop, boop. And it takes realistically no time at all. You hit the plus sign, you hit the generate performance report. And presuming this laptop doesn't melt on me, it will indeed run it a reasonable amount of time. And then magically, boop, it'll come back. And see, there you go. You see a performance characteristic against this, where the CPU idle time and the speed index and the time to interactive have gone up, and our max input delay has also gone up. What could be the problem? All of a sudden, we've got some third-party code that is being angry for us. Similarly speaking, all of a sudden the main thread is seemingly churning quite a bit. So again, these are things that you can analyze further and go, I wonder what my particular problem was in this. Oh, well, I'm not serving all of a sudden. Did I switch boxes? Did another node spin up? Is App Engine, being angry today? Don't know. We have to investigate further. And that's the beauty of it, is that you can run these tools today without having to download anything, set up anything, or do anything. Open up Chrome DevTools, run one. And then, if you find something on my site, do give me a pull request. I always take pull requests. Pull requests are great. So, with that said, that's been the notion of web performance introductions of things. We have a really great series of additional web performance talks we're going to give that are going to get into the critical rendering path, which is key to understanding sort of how the browser takes all that code you have and renders it downstream into the actual structure of things you see in these pages. Like what is this? Like, is it a node? Is it a thing? Like, what's my object model look like in that? How am I going to gen that? So we're going to get into the critical rendering path. We're going to talk about the notion of how rendering and painting works. We're going to talk about network resourcing. We're going to talk about just how you can automate a lot more of this stuff beyond just saying, oh, Justin, there's a person out there on the web. There's this Lighthouse plugin that you can use. No, we're going to get into how you set these things up, how you use these things on a daily basis in your workflows. Again, regardless of your chosen framework and or platform choices. And it's going to be fun because performance is amazing. And with that, I'm going to switch back over to the screen. If I can find. An application window, that'd be great. Boop, there we go. Boop, to the tools. We went to the tools. And again, that's just the cusp of the tools, by the way. That's DevTools and Lighthouse and a little bit of CDP. A little bit of Firebase, a little WebpageTest. There's so many more tools we're going to explore, including how to generate videos from your timeline, from a performance trace, how to cross-reference some of this stuff so that you get really nifty stuff. The general gist, though, is that the last thing I'll leave you with today before I go back through the remaining last part of this slide is don't be afraid of it. I see some comments about the notion of scoring. A lot of people, the score. So scoring is fun because I'm not a big fan of the fact that we top level score a lot of stuff. People get hung up on I need a 100, but again, like it sort of depends on what you're trying to deliver. Mind you, you should probably not be into the red of things on any given day. Particularly when things like main thread work, like you don't want to do that. You really should always look at those problems and, rerun a test. Like never take one data point as your sort of gold standard of a thing. Again, it's relative to a series of runs. It's relative to your overall performance for those sites on there. For the users that are using your site. So don't be afraid of it. Run those tests. Get information. The more information you have, the better off you can say, I'm going to make this and bump the score up. And with that, just as a reminder, if you found this useful today, one, do come back for the other talks. There's not just the web performance talks. We have a whole great series of talks from a great set of speakers and trainers. I'm not the only one, as that would be terrible if I was the only one rambling most of the time. Do I ramble? Yeah, people are shaking their heads. I can see you shaking your heads out there. So a lot of that is going to get covered across a wide range of other talks. So do come back for next week's talk as well. And And if you're really interested and you're like, wow, I would like you guys to come and you all rather, to come and do mini trainings and teach us about more things that are very specific to our code bases and things. We can do that thing with our virtual corporate trainings. So if you've got code or stuff out there and you have performance problems and we've heard this a lot lately because of the ongoing pandemic, of which I hope you're all safe out there. If you're having performance problems because of the massive influx you've got, do let us know. We can do virtual trainings from where we are all over the world, which we do on a fairly daily basis at this point, to help people sort of sort out their performance gaps, be it at the server level or on the web front end. So if you do have a corporate need out there, do let us know and contact us at hi@thisdoc.co. So that's all for this version of Web Performance. I have been and continue to be Justin Ribeiro. If you have questions, do feel free to ping me on Twitter, or you can send me an email. My email is also on that website. And if you have other needs, do let us at this.know. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. It's nice and sunny here. I'm on the West Coast. If you're back east or anywhere around the world, again, stay safe out there, and I look forward to seeing you all next week for more things web performance, more things. Well, we'll see if we can make somebody's site a little faster next time. Have a good rest of your day/evening.